Hello again everyone, and welcome to my next video. This will be part 5 in the ongoing series in which I analyze Rabbi Gestetner's response to the corrupt rabbinic judges who falsify halacha in matters of Jewish divorce. This series has been an essential tool in exposing the truth that the corrupt rabbinic judges have been hiding from us all along, and that is that the gittin, or religious divorce documents being procured by these charlatans, are in fact fraudulent, and that the women receiving them are in reality still married to their husbands according to halacha. This is a monumental problem plaguing our times, yet you will scarcely find anyone else out there who has been bringing these facts to the attention of the public, except of course on this channel. And the reason for that should be patently obvious. As with any other whistleblowing action, you can expect both message and messenger alike to be vilified and slandered by the bodies directly or indirectly perpetrating the injustice in question. And while in this case it refers to the American dayanim, or rabbinical judges in general, it also applies no less to the dayanim belonging to the Rabbanut in Israel. So to anyone who's a newcomer to this channel, I invite you to watch my previous 4 videos in this series so you get a better picture of what this is all about. As always, I have linked for you below the video containing the presentation made by the 2 questionable rabbis, Jacobson and Kahan, the dissemination of which was the impetus for making this video series in the first place. And of course, you can find there Rabbi Gestetner's full response letter in Hebrew as well. So let us begin now with statement number 9. At approximately the 1 hour and 6 minute mark in the video, Jacobson mentions the case of moesalai, which is where a married woman is not interested in therapy or reconciliation, but instead just wants out of the marriage. He then makes the case that not only is her husband considered an abuser if he doesn't give her a get on demand, but also that every community should be ejecting this man from the synagogue and food vendors should refuse any services to him. Let us hear it now in his own words.
And his therapist told me, the woman does not want to be married to him. She does not want to be married to him. He says, no, let's go to therapy. She said, I don't want therapy. I want out. I want that. So this is an interesting case. The guy says, I want therapy. I want shalom bayis. The woman says, I'm a prisoner. I want out. It's in a famous expression of the Rambam, where is it in Ishus? You can't force, he says, you can't, what's the Rambam? You can't force a woman to be with a man that she does not want. You can't. It's just immoral. It's bad. It's wrong. It's unjust to force a woman to live with a man who she does not want to live with. It would be great if she wants therapy. It would be great if she loves him. It would be great if she's ready to go for CBT or hundreds of other forms of therapy. Wonderful. She does not want. Maybe she's right. Maybe she's wrong. Maybe she's making the mistake of her life. Maybe she knows exactly what she's doing. But this person refuses. I want therapy. I want shalom bayis. And then I realized I am being an accomplice for torture. And I went contrary to my own disposition, my own nature. And I turned to him and I said, listen, if by this Friday you give a get, good. If not, please do not step foot into my shul ever again, and do not step foot into any shir that I will give ever again. I do not want to see you on Zoom. I do not want to see you live. I cannot become somebody who's an accomplice to somebody who's mamish torturing his wife. Can't. And he listened. He stopped showing up. And we're dealing here so. But my point here is, I asked Rabbi Khan, who's a very big posek in this, and I said, here's an interesting situation. He says, I'll go to the Rav. I'm going to tell the Rav, I want therapy. I want shalom bayis. I don't want to get. But you cannot force a woman to be in a relationship. And I think every single one of us needs to stand up to all Gett abusers. And if you're not sure, find out. Do the research. If a person is showing up and following halach, and it's the woman's fault, okay, find out if a person is really just squirreling out of every situation and they're ready to prolong the torture for 10, 20 years, they have all the time in the world. They have all the time in the world. Then we as a community should make it clear to this person, you're not going to get support. If every community would throw out of the shuls every person who's torturing their wife, if the person walks into a bagel shop and the person behind the counter says, no, I will not sell you a bagel with avocado. Just like if you would have a gun or you would be a molester, get out of my store, give a get. Then I'll...
Rabbi Gestetner's response to this nonsense is, once again, that it exemplifies the sort of statement expected from a person like Jacobson, who involves himself in matters of Jewish divorce without any of the necessary expertise to do so. Chazal, our rabbis of blessed memory, have said that people like this bring destruction upon the world. Jacobson's ignorance of halacha, Jewish law, is on full display here, mocking most of the sages of history, our Rishonim and Achronim, and making them appear as heartless people, heaven forbid. Jacobson's modus operandi is to first decide what his agenda is, then search for a halacha quote to back up his agenda, without him having any clear knowledge about how the halacha is actually decided. In this particular example, he quotes the Rambam without ever realizing that the law does not follow the Rambam in this particular halacha. In fact, there are approximately 40 Rishonim who disagree with this Rambam, including great sages such as Rabbeinu Tam, the Rashba, the Ramban, the Ritva, and the Ran. They rule unanimously that in case of moedes, the case that Jacobson was referring to, any sort of coercion against the husband to divorce his wife will result in mamzerim, or illegitimate children, to be born to her and her new husband. This is stated clearly in Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch 777. Number 2, along with the Chelkas B'choykik, the Rosh is quoted as saying that a wife is given the chance to use constructive means to appease or convince her husband to grant her the divorce she is seeking. Still, we cannot force her to live with him, so if her efforts fail in this regard, the only option she has left is to remain separate from him for the rest of her life. Because again, we never coerce a get in the case of moedes, period, end of story. Rabbi Gestetner has extensively quoted many poskim to back up this position, as can be seen in his letter in paragraph 23. And yet, Jacobson has the nerve to disregard the vast majority of the poskim, urging his listeners to commit 2 atrocities. 1, shaming the men in public and ejecting them from the synagogue and from Torah classes. This is considered in the Torah as if he were spilling their blood. And 2, telling vendors to refrain from selling them food, which in essence is a death sentence through starvation. And he bases this capital punishment on the Rambam, an opinion we do not even follow in this case. But in reality, it is just the opposite, that these men are simply innocent victims who are being persecuted exclusively and falsely by this evil Russian named Jacobson, who's trying to get the men's blood spilled. For we have never heard of even one woman violator, such as one who used the secular court in her divorce, that Jacobson ever prevented from attending any of his lectures, not even one. Another one of the tricks of the fake dayanim that Rabbi Gestetner points out here is that they advise women to offer their husband to go to marital therapy, ostensibly to see if their marriage can be repaired. But the catch is that she will only agree to go to therapy if the husband agrees to accept the therapist's final decision about the fate of the marriage. And what is left unsaid about that is, if the therapist declares the marriage to be unworkable, the husband will have to agree to provide her a get. So the naive husband does not know that this little game has all been rigged in advance, and while he thinks and hopes it will end in reconciliation, the truth is that it was all a trap set up for him right from the start. So therefore, there are 3 reasons that such a get is invalid in these kinds of cases. 2 from the din of Meusa, and 1 from the din of Muteh, which means a get based on misrepresentation, such as in the case of the therapist. We move on now to statement number 10. Jacobson states that anyone with a siruv from a bezdin who does not show up even in cases where the wife kidnaps the children has no excuse for not showing up to bezdin, and people must make sure that he gets no aliya or getting called up to the Torah in the synagogue. Let us listen now to this segment.
But the biggest one was she kidnapped the kids, okay? Now, therefore, I don't have to give her a get, right? Until we figure it out in court. It's already going on in court 5 years. And it could go on another 5 years. It's based in, he's not showing up. He has a siruv. So in any case where there's a siruv, even if the guy has a taina, which may be legitimate, I don't know, maybe his taina is really legitimate. Maybe the woman kidnapped the kids and did something bad, but he hasn't shown up to Beis Din. Okay, so I want to double clarify the question. The man might have a legitimate story to tell. The woman may have really done the wrong thing by him, but there's a siruv and he's not showing up to Din Torah. Can I give that guy an aliya? Can I serve him the bagel with the avocado? If he comes to my simcha, do I kick him out? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is something very simple and very obvious. If a real bezdin, a reputable bezdin, a bezdin that is known to follow halacha and shulchan aruch, which means it's loyal to the das Torah, to the view of Torah. If this person got a sira from this bezdin, it is our obligation to follow through. And let's understand this. Let's say he has a legitimate complaint. What does that legitimate complaint mean? That your woman, your wife, is now in shackles at the mercy of your decision when to give a get for 45 years? Yes, do not give him an aliyah. And yes, do not sit at a fabrengen with him and make it clear why. Why? Because we will not, in the name of Torah and in the name of Yiddishkeit, give an aliyah to the Torah when you are doing something that's desecrating the whole Torah, because the whole Torah is about being respectful to another human being, especially a Jewish woman, especially the mother of your own children.
Rabbi Gestetner's answer to that lie is that the husband is justifying not coming to Beis Din. All the poskim state that so long as the wife does not agree to abandon her litigation in the secular court and return what she has taken from him illegally, he's not obligated to come to Beis Din on her command. This point was covered already in part 3 of this series, where I mentioned in statement number 5 that we have a rule of ein eskoking law, which means we do not cater to a woman who violates the Torah by engaging with a secular court. Going ahead with the Beis Din process in this case will only result in the procurement of an invalid get with all of its associated sins. Therefore, God forbid we persecute such a man who is innocent of any wrongdoing. What Jacobson said about not giving him an aliyah is contrary to what the maharik wrote in chapter 188, which I will link below, that not giving an aliyah is tantamount to shaming someone in public, and we have already mentioned that shaming a person in public invalidates the get according to all poskim from the din of Meusa. We now arrive at statement number 11, made by Avi Kahan, the person Rabbi Gestetner refers to as the Dayan Sheker, the fake judge. And here is what he says.
One thing on that topic?
Yeah, sure. I was coming to you anyway.
Yeah, I remember like 7-8 years ago, I was sitting with Reb Zalman Lechemi Goldberg, and he was giving a ruling. It wasn't during a din Torah, but he was thinking about giving a ruling that the Rabbanut is allowed to force a specific individual to give a get. And the Rabbanut has processes under Israeli law that allow to throw someone into jail in certain cases, if they rule he's one of the people you're allowed to force to give a get. And in middle, he tells me that he got not emails, because the Rabbanut got emails about his case that there's a Divrei Malkiel that says not like him. So Reb Zalman Nechemia was a baki in all achreinim, but he didn't recall that Divrei Malkiel. And he says, look, he's not of the opinion that one Divrei Malkiel could change his mind. And even though the Divrei Malkiel says you cannot force the guy to give a get, it's not going to change from the other 50, 60 chuvas that he found that said you could give. I decided to go check up the Divrei Malkiel in his house. Reb Zalman Nechemia didn't have one over there in his house. So I went to a Beis Medrash near his house, COLLIVE, and there was a Divrei Malkiel. And I opened up the Divrei Malkiel. And the case was discussing if you're separated long enough, could you force the husband to give a get? There's no specific reason or personality or characteristic trait that the husband has that would deem him. It's just separation. The time itself, is that enough of a reason to force? And the Divrei Malkiel is talking about a case where a Rav in New York sent him a letter to say, I want to force a lady to accept the get for the separation. And quoted the Rabbeinu Yerucham, the pasuk that says that after separation, a certain amount of time, you could force. And the Divrei Malkiel says, no, we don't pass like that, Rabbeinu Yerucham, and you cannot force the lady to accept the get. Forcing a lady to accept the get is going against a Cherem B'Beinu Gershom, and you have to be makbid, and you can't use that Divrei Malkiel. And he writes to the Rav, you're probably a New York Rav who just wants to make a name for yourself, and you can't use it. And I went running back to Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, and I said, the Divrei Malkiel is the opposite. The Divrei Malkiel is talking about forcing a lady to accept the get. He says, you don't use the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham. We were talking about a case forcing a man. Came along somebody who found the Divrei Malkiel, probably thought nobody's going to check into it and what it says, and said, let's use this Divrei Malkiel and let's misquote it to be able to hurt ladies. This Divrei Malkiel was written to protect ladies. Let's use it to hurt ladies. I want to say clearly that any pasuk that you're going to bring to the table that says something that contradicts common sense and what does it mean, like nitna ha-Torah el alas shalom b'neihem, that the whole Torah was given to create peace. If you find a halacha that contradicts derech darchinoyim, which the Gemara paskins in Yevamos and in Sukkah, halachas based on derech darchinoyim. We establish what a lulav is. We establish if a lady who's pregnant or falls to yibum, what her status is, based on the halacha of derech darchinoyim. If you find a tshuva that somebody's quoting that contradicts that, check up the tshuva inside. I could probably tell you with all confidence that it's false. And any tshuva that people are going to send, any tzemach tzedek, any maramokim, check it up inside because it's being misquoted. The Torah is not here to harm people.
Rabbi Gestetner's response to this is that finally, at long last, we have Kahan citing a source, supposedly, which is something a lying judge is usually afraid to do because of how easily they can be caught in a lie. In this case, he quotes the Divrei Malkiel, but as we shall soon see, there are no less than 5 lies embedded in those statements, and I will go through each one of those lies with you. But before I do that, it is important to first understand the case that the Divrei Malkiel was referring to, because it is the opposite of the kind of case that we are accustomed to hearing about. It was about an argumentative woman that the husband could not put up with anymore, and therefore he wanted a divorce. But the woman wanted shalom bayis and not a divorce, and she refused to accept his get from him. This situation went on for 14 years straight. So the question was, do we abstain from coercing the wife to accept the get, just like in the usual case of moesalai, when the wife wants to divorce the husband, where the usual rule of the poskim is that we cannot coerce the husband to divorce her? Or maybe we should say the opposite, that we can force her to accept the get, because Torah law allows a man to divorce his wife against her will, and the only reason we usually don't allow this is because of Cherem the Rabbeinu Gershom. And remember that even according to Rabbeinu Gershom, if a man went ahead and gave her such a get, it would still be valid. So the answer is that in such a case, the majority of poskim rule that a man who finds his wife repugnant can issue her a get against her will, and only a minority of poskim say that it cannot be done. One of those dissenting poskim is the Divrei Malkiel, the same one that Kahan mentions, which can be found in Chelek Gimel Siman Kuf Mem Hey. He rules that the husband cannot forcibly divorce his wife. What Kahan was referring to here was an incident involving Rabbi Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, a Rabbanut affiliate in Israel, who was dealing with the common scenario of today's world, a case where the woman was claiming moesalai, the kind of case where Goldberg and his Rabbanut cronies automatically forced a man to divorce his wife. Then someone came along and showed Goldberg the Divrei Makil, a posek who said you cannot force a divorce in a case of moasalai, and tried to extrapolate from this that he, Goldberg, should not force the man to divorce. The point this man was trying to make was, if in the case of forcing the woman, which is only a derabanan, based on the cherem d'Rabbeinu Gershom, the rabbis rule that the get is still valid, and yet we see that nonetheless the Divrei Makil rules that we cannot do it, then certainly where the woman claims moasalai, as in Goldberg's case, how could you force the man to divorce? Since most poskim argue that it invalidates the get, and the sin would not only be derabanan, but rather prohibited min Torah, which is much more severe. But Goldberg did not care about this logical argument and insisted on forcing the man to divorce his wife anyway. So now, my friends, it is time to expose the lies in Kahan's statements. Lie number 1. Kahan stated that Goldberg relied on 50 or 60 poskim to allow coercion in that case of moasalai. Newsflash for Kahan: there are not even 20 poskim that allow this, and of those that allow it, 7 are Rishonim, and 7 are other poskim who are not well known, but they all go against the Shulchan Aruch and the vast majority of poskim that forbid coercion, and anyone who relies on a minority of poskim is an apikoros, as well as a fake daim. Lie number 2. Kahan states that the Divrei Makil quotes the Rabbeinu Yerucham, but that is a false statement, since the Rabbeinu Yerucham is speaking of an entirely different scenario, so why would the Divrei Makil quote him? Lie number 3. The Rabbeinu Yerucham himself never stated that after 1 year of separation we can force a husband to divorce. What he did say is that when both spouses rebel against each other, we could force the man to divorce. But notice that in this case, where again it is the man who also dislikes his wife and also separated himself from her, the Rabbeinu Yerucham is strict and rules that we do not force him to divorce her immediately. Rather, we wait 12 months to verify that she also dislikes him. And then, and only then, do we allow coercion. But the reality is that if a man rebels against his wife and separates from her, but then, before the Beis Din has a chance to coerce him into giving her a get, he turns around and states that he now wants to reconcile with her, he can then no longer be coerced. This is because coercive measures are not intended to be a punishment for his past rebellion, but rather they are only meant as a preventative measure against her future state of being an aguna. So therefore, if he changes his mind and wants to reconcile, even if it happens after many years of separation, he can no longer be coerced to divorce his wife. This position is stated openly in the Noida Beyehuda, which I have linked below, who cited a case where the husband rebelled against his wife and vanished for 12 years, and even took another wife illegally in the interim. Still, since he ended his rebellion against his first wife, the Noida Beyehuda ruled that not only are we forbidden to coerce him to divorce her, but we cannot even tell him privately that he should give a get, even if she does not wish to reconcile with him. Yet the heretic rabbis of the Israeli Rabbanut have chosen to disregard this ruling, and instead they are known to apply all forms of illegal, coercive tactics, such as placing husbands in jail or revoking their exit permit to leave Israel, all practices which invalidate the get. I will say it again. In a regular case of moasalai, where the woman alone is the one who says that she's disgusted with her husband, we are not even allowed to tell the man that he must give a get, let alone to coerce him to do so. Another thing we see clearly from Kahan's words is that he does not want the public to understand the real meaning behind the Divrei Makil's words, which in turn implies that coercion against a man has a much more serious implications than it does for coercing a woman. Kahan clearly was trying to hide the fact that the Divrei Makil forbade someone to forcibly divorce his spouse even after 14 years of separation, which is anathema in today's society where everyone is expected to just let the other person move on with their life. Lie number 4. If you want to know the most telling sign that Kahan's feminism is entrenched from the days he was groomed by the Rabbanut, it is where he says that someone is trying to use a psak of the Diva Makil to hurt ladies, because in Lady Dayan Kahan's perverse worldview, the ladies are the only ones deserving of any protection, and there's no problem whatsoever in hurting a man. We see this also from his insinuation that the Diva Makil would only prohibit coercing a woman to accept a get, but not forbid coercing a man into giving one. In Lady Dayan Kahan's twisted mind, the halacha is more careful in the case of coercing a woman and reckless in the case of coercing a man. And yet, every simpleton who is versed in basic halacha knows that it is just the opposite, that coercion of a man is far more serious than coercing a woman, since coercing a man produces the sins of Eshes Ish and Mamzerim, whereby coercing a woman at the very most is just a lower Isser Derabanan, and it doesn't even invalidate the get. The Rosh explained that the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, which forbade the coercing of a woman to accept a get, was not intended to negate the sin of coercing a man. Rather, it was only intended to add the woman into the equation. But you see, until now, the Rabbanut of Israel was too embarrassed to proclaim publicly that it was stringent in coercing women and lenient in coercing men. But Lady Dayan Kahan himself has no such compunction, since he obviously has no problem in publicly ridiculing our holy poskim who warned us about scoundrels such as these who are megal upanim b'Torah shelo halacha. And finally, we have lie number 5. Rabbi Gestetner says that what is most troubling about Kahan's statements is that even after he distorts the holy words of the poskim, he poisons the water further by trying to ridicule anyone who even attempts to quote a psak that forbids coercing a man. We see this by his observation that the person who brought the Diva Malkiel to the attention of Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg was trying to twist the meaning of it. And so Lady Dayan Kahan will not believe any person who tries to prove that you cannot coerce a man to divorce. Well, Kahan's statements blatantly deny the fact that there are more than 150 poskim, and amongst them the Shulchan Aruch itself, that forbid this. And so, how in the world can he make the arrogant statement that anyone showing him a teshuvah or halachic response to that states you cannot coerce a man to divorce is false? Even more astonishingly, he bases his theory on the concept of derochei darchei noam, which means the ways of the Torah are pleasant. But there is a major flaw in Kahan's thinking. At the end of the Torah reading of Shalach, we have the story of the Mekoshish Eitzim, the stick gatherer, who was stoned to death for violating the Shabbos. So we might think it a good question to ask, why the Torah, whose ways are pleasant, decreed such a terrible capital punishment of skila on the stick gathering man, leaving his poor wife and children in such bereavement? Obviously then, we cannot depend upon our finite human minds to decide what is pleasant and what is not. When we have a clear Torah law which instructs us to do something, such as keeping the Shabbos, and then also informs us of the serious punishments meted out for its violation, all of it by definition is included in the pleasantness of the Torah, whether we understand why or not. But it is also very ironic that the Marashdam invoked Derochei Darchei Noam in the exact opposite way the likes of Jacobson and Kahan intended, which for them means pleasant for the ladies only. It was a case where a wife rebelled against her husband, and 4 years later he wanted to get remarried. The Marashdam decided that the husband need not worry about the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershon, which normally forbids a man to marry 2 wives, and that he ought to be allowed to remarry. In an interesting twist, the Marashdam invoked the maxim Derochei Darchei Noam, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant, and therefore the man should not be left to suffer alone for the rest of his life. He ended his tshuva by saying that whoever tries to prevent this man from marrying another woman is a big sinner. And Rabbi Akiva Eger brings down this Marashdam as the halacha that we must follow. But it is most important to remember that the idea of pleasantness was not invoked here in a matter which violates a clear Jewish law. This sentiment was also invoked by the Shevet HaLevi, Rabbi Wozner Zatzal, who stated that you cannot use Dorachei Adachinoam to negate a clear halacha. Yet Lady Dayan Kahan, along with his Rabbanut cronies in Israel, love to use this slogan as a means to circumvent halacha to make it favor only the ladies. On that last point, I would like to add a little something of my own. The phrase Dorachei Adachinoam is referring to the Torah, which in the Hebrew language takes the feminine cognate, as in HaTorah HaKedosha. But an alternate reading of the phrase simply tells us that the ways of the woman are pleasant. That constitutes a stern warning to Lady Dayan Kahan, who should be admonishing his ladies to choose the ways of pleasantness instead of choosing ways that are not pleasing to the Torah, namely the ladies' litigations in civil court and their kidnapping of the children away from the father, which results in preventing their husbands from fulfilling the mitzvah of Veshinantim Levanecha and robbing them of this great mitzvah. In conclusion, Rabbi Gestetner issues a warning to all men who are contemplating going to a din Torah presided upon by this Lady Dayan. He says that you will never succeed in achieving a fair verdict in divorce matters from this fraudster who believes in shaming a man in public and all other forms of coercion to extract a get, shalok halacha, all in the name of Derachei Adachinoam. So stay tuned for my next video as I continue to bring you the next installment in this series, exposing the lies of the rogue rabbis and judges in matters of Jewish divorce. Until then, thank you for watching and see you all in the next video.